9 languages? Maxwell Reed let out a sharp laugh that echoed across the glittering ballroom. Someone like you should stick to carrying trays. Without warning, the billionaire CEO deliberately slammed his hand into Jasmine Thompson's serving tray. The silver platter lurched upward, sending expensive hors d'oeuvres flying across the marble floor. Champagne splashed down the front of Jasmine's black uniform, soaking her collar and sleeves. The room fell eerily silent. Executives froze mid-conversation. Waiters stopped in their tracks. Every eye shifted between the teenage black server, standing motionless with champagne dripping from her clothes, and the powerful businessman who had humiliated her without a second thought. Jasmine's fingers curled around the edge of the tray, trembling just enough for her to notice. Folded carefully inside her pocket was the acceptance letter she'd worked years to earn. Yale University's prestigious linguistics program. "Sir, I was only trying to— You were trying to forget where you belong," Reed interrupted coldly. He adjusted the cuff of his designer suit, as if she had somehow contaminated the air around him. His gold watch caught the ballroom lights. "This room is negotiating a $100 million international agreement. We need professionals here, not people pretending to be one." Without waiting for a reply, Reed turned toward his investors and effortlessly switched into polished French. A few guests nodded in admiration. Jasmine didn't, because every sentence he spoke contained awkward phrasing, cultural mistakes, and subtle pronunciation flaws. Inside her mind, she could answer him in French, or Japanese, or German, or Arabic, or 6 other languages, each one far more naturally than he ever could. "You all right, Jay?" Carlos whispered while they refilled serving trays behind the kitchen doors. "That guy's a complete nightmare." Jasmine quietly wiped the last drops of champagne from her collar before straightening her name tag. "I'm okay." But she wasn't. At only 17 years old, Jasmine had spent her entire life being underestimated. Teachers assumed she wasn't the smartest student in class. Strangers questioned whether she belonged in advanced programs. Security guards followed her through expensive stores while ignoring everyone else. Still, humiliation like this felt different. It burned. Her mother, a Kenyan professor of linguistics, had raised her to respect every language because every language carried a history. Her father, an African-American jazz musician, taught her that talent meant nothing without discipline. Together, they repeated the same lesson throughout her childhood. If the world refuses to notice you, become impossible to ignore. Jasmine glanced at her watch. Just 5 more hours. One final catering job before leaving for college. Yale had already accepted her through early admission, but there was one painful obstacle still standing in her way. Even after scholarships, she still needed another $15,000. Carlos peeked through the ballroom doors. "Have you noticed who's here tonight?" Jasmine looked up. Delegations from Japan, Germany, China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, France, Kenya. Executives from nearly every major market Reed Technologies hoped to conquer. "This is the biggest deal Reed has ever chased," Carlos said quietly. Jasmine nodded while carefully arranging another tray. Languages had always been her escape. Whenever classmates mocked the Kenyan food packed in her lunchbox, whenever someone asked if she'd cheated to earn top grades, whenever people assumed she couldn't possibly belong, she buried herself deeper inside dictionaries, grammar books, and foreign literature. By 14, she spoke 5 languages fluently. By 16, 9. "My mom says I have a natural ear," she'd often joke whenever people looked shocked. The truth was much less glamorous. Thousands of late nights practicing Mandarin tones until sunrise. Weekends volunteering as a translator at community centers. Countless hours reading poetry, legal documents, and history books in languages most adults never attempted to learn. Nothing about it came naturally. She earned every word. Her phone vibrated. A text from her father appeared. Asterisk, "Go show the world who you are, sweetheart. Your future is brighter than they can imagine." Asterisk, Jasmine smiled despite everything. Her father's faith had always outweighed the opinions of people like Maxwell Reed. He worked exhausting double shifts at the jazz club just to help save money for her education. No matter how tired he was, he never missed one debate, one language competition, or one award ceremony. Yale wasn't only her dream anymore. It belonged to both of them. Between serving rounds, Jasmine slipped into the employee restroom. From her apron pocket, she pulled out a stack of worn flashcards. Advanced Japanese business terminology. She whispered quietly, "Kyako," contract, then switched languages without hesitation. "Contrato," "Vertrag." Each pronunciation steadied her heartbeat. She had started carrying language cards when she was only 12 years old. While most teenagers scrolled through social media, Jasmine memorized grammar structures, legal vocabulary, and diplomatic etiquette. Her dream wasn't simply to speak languages. She wanted to become one of the world's top international interpreters. 2 minutes, Thompson. The catering manager's voice echoed from outside the door. Jasmine tucked the cards away and returned to work. As she entered the preparation area, she overheard two event coordinators speaking in frantic whispers. "The translation company just canceled." "What?" "They're stranded overseas. 9 international delegations are already here. Can't we just use translation software?" The woman nearly laughed. For $100 million contract? One mistranslated legal clause could destroy everything. Jasmine slowed her pace. She understood exactly how serious this was. During her internship with the International Business Council, she'd watched billion-dollar negotiations collapse over a single misunderstood phrase. Language wasn't vocabulary. Language was trust. Later, while serving desserts, Jasmine watched Maxwell Reed presenting his technology to a German executive. His German sounded polished, but something felt painfully wrong. The investor smiled politely, yet his eyes hardened. Jasmine immediately recognized the mistake. Reed had switched to informal speech far too quickly. In German business culture, respect came before familiarity. Instead of building trust, he had unintentionally insulted one of the most important investors in the room. Reed never noticed. He continued smiling confidently, completely blind to the opportunity slipping through his fingers. Before the evening presentation began, catering manager Sandra gathered the entire staff. "Listen carefully." Her voice was firm. "Tonight, these executives are making decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars." She scanned every employee before stopping on Jasmine. "Your job is simple. Be invisible. No conversations. No opinions. No mistakes. And after what happened earlier," she looked directly at Jasmine, "stay completely out of Mr. Reed's sight." Jasmine simply nodded. She had spent years mastering invisibility. In classrooms where teachers ignored her raised hand. In hallways where security guards questioned her while everyone else walked by. She already knew how to disappear. Assigned to the Japanese delegation, Jasmine quietly poured coffee while the executives spoke freely around her, assuming she understood nothing. "Reed is overconfident," one businessman said in Japanese. "The financial projections don't match our independent research." "The technology is impressive," another replied, "but these licensing terms won't work in our market." Jasmine kept pouring coffee without changing her expression. A few steps away, Arabic executives voiced concerns about export regulations. The Brazilian delegation debated expansion strategies in rapid Portuguese. The French questioned Reed's pricing. The Chinese discussed intellectual property protections. Every table carried another piece of the same puzzle. Tyler, another server, leaned toward her. "Must be weird listening to all that gibberish." Jasmine smiled politely. "Just sounds like background noise." But it wasn't. It was a room overflowing with secrets, information worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And no one realized the young black waitress carrying coffee understood every single word. That was the greatest advantage of being invisible. People always revealed the truth when they believed you couldn't possibly understand them. As the ballroom transformed for the night's final presentation, Jasmine silently observed every delegation. The Japanese wanted customization rights. The Germans needed long-term guarantees. The Russians doubted the company's cybersecurity promises. The Brazilians questioned market expansion timelines. The Saudi representatives wanted stronger regional protections. The French, Chinese, Spanish, and Kenyan delegates all carry concerns Reed's own executives hadn't even recognized. At the center of it all stood Maxwell Reed, overflowing with confidence. When this agreement is signed, he announced proudly to his staff, Reed Technologies will dominate 9 international markets. His assistant hurried over, visibly pale. "Sir, we have a serious problem." Reed frowned. "What now?" "Our entire translation team canceled. Flight disruptions overseas. They won't arrive." For the first time all evening, his confidence cracked. "The biggest presentation of my career," he muttered. "And we have no translators? We've contacted every agency in the city. No one is available." Jasmine paused beside the coffee station. She already knew what this meant. Without accurate interpreters, the negotiations could collapse before they even began. "Use translation software," Reed snapped. His technology director immediately shook his head. "Impossible. Technical patents, legal contracts, international regulations. One wrong translation could cost us the entire deal." Reed's jaw tightened. His voice dropped into a dangerous whisper. "You have 30 minutes. Find me a solution, or start looking for new jobs. The deal closes tonight." Maxwell Reed didn't shout. He didn't need to. The calmness in his voice was far more intimidating than anger. Everyone around him instantly scattered, grabbing phones and laptops, calling universities, agencies, and anyone remotely qualified. Across the ballroom, Jasmine caught Carlos looking at her. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them had to. The answer to everyone's problem was standing in the room carrying a coffee tray, and no one had bothered to notice. Jasmine slipped quietly into the service hallway, her pulse racing. Beyond the swinging kitchen doors, she could hear Reed's executives growing increasingly frantic. "Call Harvard. What about Columbia? Try NYU. We need translators for 9 languages at the same time." Silence followed each phone call. Friday night. No notice. No chance. Jasmine leaned against the cold wall. Her mother's voice drifted back in her thoughts. Asterisk. "Your gift was never meant to make you feel important, Jasmine. Asterisk, asterisk. It was meant to connect people when no one else could." Asterisk, another voice answered immediately. Her own. Asterisk, step forward, and you could lose everything. Asterisk, this catering job wasn't glamorous, but it helped pay bills. Sandra had made one thing perfectly clear. Invisible employees stayed employed. Visible ones became problems. Through the small kitchen window, Jasmine watched Reed pacing furiously. Only a few hours earlier, he had mocked her in front of the entire ballroom. Now the same man was watching his biggest business deal collapse because he lacked the very skill he dismissed in her. The irony was almost unbearable. The Japanese delegation checked their watches. The German investors quietly packed their folders. The Kenyan representatives began collecting their documents. $100 million. All slipping away because the only person capable of fixing the disaster had been told she didn't belong. Carlos quietly joined her. "You know every language they're looking for." Jasmine stared at the floor. "I've heard you practicing during breaks. Japanese, Mandarin, Arabic, French, German, Portuguese. You know all 9. Still," she said nothing. "If you step in, I could get fired." Carlos couldn't argue with that. Jasmine returned to the empty staff room. She removed her serving tray and sat down. 10 minutes. That was all she had left on her break. 10 minutes to decide whether tonight would define the rest of her life. Her phone buzzed. A new email. Yale Financial Aid Office. Asterisk, reminder, supplemental scholarship deadline is Monday. Failure to complete the interview process may affect your admission status. Asterisk, her stomach tightened. Without additional funding, Yale would disappear. She opened the family group chat. A fresh photo appeared. Her father stood backstage at the jazz club, saxophone resting against his shoulder. His caption made her smile despite herself. Asterisk, picked up another late-night set. Asterisk, asterisk. Every note gets you one step closer to college. Asterisk, moments later, another message appeared. From her mother. Asterisk, never shrink your light because someone else is uncomfortable with its brightness. Asterisk, Jasmine closed her eyes. Her mother understood. Years earlier, she'd left a respected university position in Nairobi after marrying Jasmine's father. She knew exactly what it felt like to have people underestimate you before you even open your mouth. But inspirational quotes didn't pay tuition. Reality demanded consequences. Outside the room, Reed's voice echoed again. Surely everyone speaks English. Several delegates immediately objected in their own languages. Jasmine understood every one of them. No, English wasn't enough. Not for legal agreements. Not for software architecture. Not for intellectual property rights worth millions. She pictured two futures. In one, she stepped forward. Reed humiliated her again. Sandra fired her. Every catering company in the city blacklisted her. In the other, she stayed silent. Watched the deal collapse. Watched Yale slowly slip away because fear had convinced her to disappear. Neither future felt safe. Her break timer chimed. Decision made. Carlos appeared in the doorway. They're leaving. The Japanese delegation already called for transportation. Jasmine stood, slowly straightened her uniform, smoothed the wrinkles from her sleeves, then looked at Carlos. Sometimes staying invisible is the biggest mistake you can make. She found the event coordinator, Diane, surrounded by ringing phones and half-finished conversations. 3 different languages poured from various speakerphones, while agency after agency declined the emergency request. Excuse me. Diane barely looked up. What? I think I can help. We're handling it. But I said we've got it. Her voice sharpened immediately. Unless you've suddenly become a certified international interpreter instead of a catering server. Please go back to work. Jasmine refused to move. I speak all 9 languages your delegates need. For the first time, Diane looked directly at her, then laughed. Really? And I'm the Queen of England. We're dealing with government officials, CEOs, lawyers, and engineers. This isn't ordering food in Spanish on vacation. It's not a joke, Jasmine answered quietly. I can prove it. Diane folded her arms. Do you even understand what's being negotiated? Technical patents, international licensing, legal compliance. You honestly expect me to believe a teenage waitress can translate all of that? I've studied business interpretation for years. I know the terminology. Diane sighed impatiently before lowering her voice. Listen carefully. Even if, and that's a very big if, you spoke those languages. No executive in this room would trust someone wearing a catering uniform. So, unless you want me calling your supervisor, go. The words hit harder than Maxwell Reed's public humiliation. Because Reed had judged her in anger, Diane dismissed her with absolute certainty. Someone who looked like Jasmine simply couldn't possess that level of expertise. At least, that's what Diane believed. Jasmine turned away. Near the ballroom entrance, she overheard the Japanese delegation leader speaking softly to his assistant. In flawless Japanese, he said, "We cannot continue. The technical documentation contains too many translation errors. There is too much risk." His assistant nodded. "Our car is already waiting." Jasmine kept walking. The knowledge that could save everything walked away with her, and nobody even realized it. The atmosphere inside the ballroom deteriorated by the minute. Conversations grew shorter. Executives checked flight schedules. Phones buzzed constantly. Someone suggested placing translation software on tablets at every table. "We already tested that," another executive replied. "The legal language is inaccurate. The Japanese technical sections are almost unreadable." Coffee in hand, Jasmine moved silently between tables. The Brazilian delegation discussed catching an earlier flight. The Saudi representatives debated extending their hotel reservations. Nobody trusted software to interpret billion-dollar contracts. The German investor finally spoke in careful English. "Perhaps. We postpone until professional translators are available." Reed forced another confident smile. "If we delay, our competitors move first. We all lose." The French delegation answered rapidly in French. Jasmine understood every word. Asterisk if they failed to organize basic communication. Asterisk asterisk. What else have they failed to prepare? Asterisk Reed nodded politely. He clearly hadn't understood. His translation app captured barely half the conversation. Across the room, the Chinese delegation quietly questioned the company's cybersecurity claims. Without proper interpretation, trust was disappearing. Her phone vibrated again. Another reminder from Yale. Scholarship interview. Monday. Mandatory. She stared at the screen. This catering shift barely covered textbook costs. But losing Yale would cost far more than money. Carlos passed carrying empty glasses. They're leaving. First Japan, then Germany. He looked straight into her eyes. Are you really going to let this happen? Jasmine watched Reed struggling to control a room that was slipping away from him. Carlos spoke one last time. The biggest mistake isn't failing. It's never trying. This is unacceptable. Reed's voice thundered as the Japanese delegation formally rose. The lead executive bowed respectfully. Hishimoto Industries values precision. Without clear communication, we cannot continue. Reed turned toward his executives. I don't care what it takes. Find me something. There are $9 billion riding on this. For the first time all evening, Jasmine saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Real fear. Not for his reputation alone. Hundreds of employees. Entire departments. Families whose livelihoods depended on this agreement. She moved toward the Brazilian table to clear empty glasses. The executives were speaking quietly in Portuguese. It's unfortunate. The technology seems excellent, but these communication problems make future cooperation impossible. Another nodded. If licensing is misunderstood today, what happens next year? Jasmine hesitated, then made her choice. In perfect Portuguese, she spoke softly. The licensing agreement actually allows complete regional customization. Both executives froze. Their heads turned toward her simultaneously. I'm sorry, Jasmine continued gently. I couldn't help overhearing your concern. Before they could ask another question, she walked away. Her heart hammered against her ribs. There was no turning back now. Carlos caught up with her. What did you just do? She gave a nervous laugh. Probably something incredibly stupid. He grabbed her arm. No, my cousin works for Reed Technologies. If this contract dies, they're laying off 200 employees. He looked around the room. Families. Mortgages. Kids. You're afraid of losing one catering job. They're about to lose everything. Jasmine followed his gaze. Sandra watched her suspiciously from across the ballroom. The Japanese delegation approached the exit. The Germans packed the last of their documents. Failure had gathered unstoppable momentum. Sandra marched over. Thompson, what exactly are you doing? Back to your station. Jasmine inhaled slowly, then looked her manager directly in the eye. I'm sorry. I can't. She carefully placed her serving tray on the nearest table, then walked toward the center of the ballroom. Every step felt heavier than the last. The Japanese delegation had nearly reached the doors when Jasmine's clear voice echoed across the silent room. Mr. Hishimoto. She addressed him in flawless Japanese. Please allow me to explain the misunderstanding involving the API licensing structure. The executive stopped instantly, then turned around. The entire ballroom froze. Waiters, investors, executives, even Reed. Every eye fixed on the young black waitress who had suddenly begun speaking business-level Japanese with complete confidence. The translation suggested your developers would lose customization rights. Jasmine continued. That interpretation is incorrect. The platform was specifically designed for regional adaptation. Mr. Hishimoto slowly walked back toward her. You understand our concerns? Completely. The translated documents confused modular architecture with fixed source implementation. Your Tokyo engineering team would retain full flexibility. Silence. Absolute silence. Reed stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. Confusion. Disbelief. Then calculation. You work for Reed Technologies? Hishimoto asked. Jasmine smiled politely. No, I'm only part of the catering staff. But I understand what's being lost in translation. She turned toward Reed. Mr. Reed, Hishimoto Industries' biggest concern is whether your software can be adapted to Japanese business requirements. Your translated material accidentally suggested it couldn't. That isn't true, is it? Reed finally recovered. Absolutely not. Customization is one of our strongest selling points. Jasmine translated instantly. Perfectly. The Japanese executive's expression softened. You speak our language exceptionally well. Where did you study? Mostly on my own. Later, through formal academic training. She smiled. And if your Chinese partners would like clarification, I also speak Mandarin. Without hesitation, she turned toward the Chinese delegation. Within seconds, she was explaining the licensing issue from their perspective using precise technical Mandarin. The delegates exchanged surprised glances. Everything about the room changed. Sandra rushed forward. Jasmine, what do you think you're doing? Before Jasmine could answer, Mr. Hishimoto raised a hand. We would like her to continue. The room fell silent once again. Reed adjusted his jacket, instantly slipping back into CEO mode. Mississippi. He paused. Thompson. Jasmine Thompson. Miss Thompson appears to possess impressive language abilities. His carefully measured smile returned. Perhaps she can assist us until professional translators arrive. The compliment sounded polished, but Jasmine heard what everyone else missed. He still refused to acknowledge what she truly was. Not a temporary substitute. The person who had just saved his company. Jasmine simply nodded. I'll help. Then, without missing a beat, she turned back to the Chinese delegation. In flawless Mandarin, she explained the data sovereignty clause, pointing out that Section 4 guaranteed local storage and full regulatory compliance. The Chinese executives leaned forward immediately. For the first time that night, they were genuinely listening, and so was everyone else. Jasmine moved effortlessly from one language to another, translating highly technical discussions as though she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. There were no awkward pauses, no searching for words. She explained software architecture, licensing agreements, and legal terminology with the calm confidence of someone who genuinely understood every subject being discussed. Across the room, Maxwell Reed's expression slowly changed. At first, he expected her to stumble. Then he expected her to get lucky. Now, he realized she wasn't repeating memorized phrases. She actually knew what she was talking about. Mr. Hishimoto glanced toward the other delegates before speaking. Perhaps we should return to the conference table. Several executives immediately nodded. For the first time that evening, hope returned to the room. Reed straightened his jacket, forcing another polished smile. Excellent. Let's begin the presentation properly. As everyone started walking back, he leaned closer to Jasmine so only she could hear. This is unexpected. His eyes narrowed. Exactly how many languages do you speak? 9. She answered without hesitation. Every language represented in this room. He stopped walking. 9? That's impossible. No one speaks 9 languages fluently. Jasmine calmly listed them. Japanese, Mandarin, German, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and Swahili. One of Reed's senior assistants quietly scoffed. She's probably memorized greetings. Nobody is fluent in all of them. Before Jasmine could respond, one of the Saudi delegates stepped forward and addressed her in rapid Arabic. Not simple conversation. Complex technical questions involving encrypted database architecture and international compliance regulations. Without blinking, Jasmine answered, perfectly. The executive smiled, then deliberately switched into a difficult regional dialect. Again, she adapted instantly, even matching the appropriate cultural etiquette expected in formal Saudi business settings. Several executives exchanged surprised looks. For the first time, Reed looked uncertain. Jasmine politely broke the silence. Shall we continue? Everyone has traveled a long way. I don't think we should waste any more of their time. Reed studied her carefully. The calculation behind his eyes was obvious. Finally, he gestured toward the presentation stage. Very well, Miss Thompson. Let's see what you're really capable of. The delegates slowly returned to their seats. Whispers spread across the ballroom. Nobody had expected the evening's translator to be the teenage waitress carrying coffee less than 10 minutes earlier. As Reed escorted Jasmine toward the front of the room, his hand rested briefly on her elbow, just firm enough to feel controlling. His smile never reached his eyes. Listen carefully. His voice dropped into a whisper. If you embarrass this company, there will be consequences. Jasmine met his gaze. I understand exactly what's at stake. Do you? He replied immediately. This isn't a school language competition. This is a $9 billion international negotiation. His technology director approached, carrying presentation materials. Sir, should we begin the technical section? Reed never looked away from Jasmine. She claims to speak 9 languages. His voice carried enough for nearby executives to hear. Forgive me if I find that difficult to believe, especially from someone. He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Jasmine did. Someone like me? For a brief second, neither of them blinked. Reed cleared his throat. I meant someone without internationally recognized credentials. What exactly qualifies you to interpret negotiations at this level? I've studied these languages since I was a child. My mother teaches linguistics. I've completed advanced business interpretation. Anyone can claim qualifications. Reed interrupted. Memorizing vocabulary isn't fluency. Before Jasmine could answer, the Brazilian executive stood. I disagree. Everyone turned toward him. Her Portuguese isn't simply correct. It's native level, even the legal terminology. Mr. Hishimoto added calmly. Her Japanese business etiquette is flawless. That cannot be memorized. Still, Reed wasn't ready to accept what was happening. Perhaps she prepared those particular languages. The timing is convenient. His implication was impossible to miss. He believed she had planned this, maybe even infiltrated the event. Jasmine quietly folded her hands. If my presence makes anyone uncomfortable, I'll return to serving. The Kenyan representative suddenly spoke in Swahili. We've traveled across continents for this meeting. If she can help us communicate, why are we arguing? Jasmine answered him in flawless Swahili. The representative smiled immediately. Reed's jaw tightened. Finally, he sighed. Fine. We'll continue, but every translation will be verified. The challenge was obvious. He wasn't giving her an opportunity. He was waiting for her to fail. The presentation restarted. Delegates settled around the conference table while Reed stood before the giant display screen. We'll begin with the general proposal, then move into technical implementation. He glanced toward Jasmine. Miss Thompson will interpret. I encourage everyone to verify her accuracy. The room understood exactly what he meant. This wasn't trust. It was a public test. Reed deliberately accelerated his speech. Dense financial terminology, complex legal wording, highly technical software concepts. He stopped, waiting. Jasmine translated everything into Japanese without hesitation. Not word for word. Better. She adjusted the phrasing to match Japanese business culture, replacing aggressive sales language with respectful precision. Mr. Hishimoto nodded. Excellent. Completely accurate. A flicker of irritation crossed Reed's face. He immediately increased the difficulty. Advanced encryption algorithms, cloud infrastructure, patent protection. Again, Jasmine translated seamlessly. Japanese, then Mandarin, then German, without notes, without slowing down. The German investor smiled. Her German is exceptional. Frankfurt business terminology, very precise. Reed continued escalating. He introduced obscure cybersecurity vocabulary that most translators rarely encountered. Jasmine calmly translated every sentence into Arabic. The Saudi delegation exchanged impressed glances. One executive raised his hand. We have several implementation questions. Reed forced another smile. I'd prefer finishing the presentation first. But the French delegation interrupted with a detailed question in rapid French. Jasmine translated instantly. They're asking whether third-party API modules can integrate without weakening the platform security architecture. Reed blinked. Yes, that's exactly what he's asking. He looked almost annoyed that she had summarized the question more clearly than his own staff probably could have. As Jasmine translated his answer, something unexpected happened. Delegates stopped waiting for Reed. Instead, they began asking Jasmine directly. Questions poured in from every corner of the room. Mandarin, German, Arabic, Portuguese, French. Russian. She moved effortlessly between conversations, keeping everyone synchronized while explaining technical details with remarkable clarity. Reed watched his carefully rehearsed presentation disappear. He was no longer controlling the room. Jasmine was. And everyone knew it. During a short break, while revised documents were distributed, Reed quietly pulled Jasmine aside. Quite an impressive performance. His smile looked friendly. His eyes did not. Tell me something. Where exactly does a catering waitress learn international negotiation terminology? I've spent years studying. My mother is a linguistics professor. Oh, Reed interrupted. Let me guess. Your father's a diplomat. My father plays jazz. Jasmine answered simply. And somehow, Reed folded his arms. With parents on those salaries. You mastered 9 business languages? His voice became colder. Who's feeding you answers? Which competitor sent you? For the first time, Jasmine looked genuinely stunned. No one sent me. I'm here because the catering company hired me. He stepped closer. I don't buy it. No teenager develops business-level Japanese, Arabic, Mandarin, and Russian without institutional support. So who are you really working for? Before Jasmine could answer, the German investor approached with another legal question. She switched immediately into flawless German, explaining a complex contractual clause involving intellectual property rights. The investor thanked her and walked away. Reed wasn't finished. This time he raised his voice, loud enough for nearby executives to hear. I find it difficult to believe someone from your background could access this level of education without outside assistance. The implication landed heavily. It wasn't admiration. It was suspicion. My background, Jasmine asked quietly. Reed shrugged. A teenage waitress suddenly appears with world-class language skills. It doesn't make sense. Then he turned toward the room. I'm beginning to wonder whether this is more than coincidence. Several conversations stopped. This negotiation involves proprietary technology. We need to consider the possibility of corporate espionage. The accusation spread through the ballroom like electricity. Delegates exchanged uncomfortable looks. Jasmine felt the atmosphere changing. Minutes earlier, they had admired her. Now, Reed was encouraging them to question everything. She took one slow breath. I'm not a spy. I'm simply a student who dedicated years to learning languages. Reed remained silent, but his expression made one thing painfully obvious. He didn't believe a single word. The tension became unbearable. Reed whispered urgently with his legal counsel while repeatedly glancing toward Jasmine. The delegates noticed. Mr. Hishimoto quietly asked in Japanese, "Is something wrong?" Jasmine translated professionally despite everything. Moments later, Reed returned to the center of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but in order to protect everyone's intellectual property, we'll postpone negotiations until our certified translation team arrives tomorrow. The reaction was immediate. Voices erupted across the room. The Saudi delegation checked departure times. Brazilian executives began closing laptops. French representatives openly protested. This is unacceptable. We're finally making real progress. Jasmine translated faithfully, even though every sentence worked against her. Reed looked directly at her. Miss Thompson, thank you for your assistance. You may return to your catering responsibilities. Sandra appeared almost instantly. Clearly, she'd already been called. For a moment, everything felt painfully familiar. Become invisible. Stay quiet. Walk away. Then Jasmine looked around the room. These executives had listened to her, trusted her, respected her, not because of her uniform, because of her ability. She lifted her chin. With respect, Mr. Reed. The delegates still have important questions. Waiting until tomorrow may cost everyone this partnership. Reed stepped close enough that only she could hear him. You're a waitress. You've already inserted yourself into a $9 billion negotiation. Return to your station, or security will escort you out. Before Jasmine could answer, the Kenyan representative stood. If she leaves, we leave. The room fell silent. Mr. Hishimoto rose next. We finally understand the proposal. We're not starting over tomorrow. The German investor nodded. I agree. One by one, Every delegation sided with Jasmine. Reed suddenly found himself trapped. Keep Jasmine, or lose billions. His assistant hurried over, whispering rapidly into his ear. Reed closed his eyes for a brief moment, then forced another corporate smile. Very well. We'll continue. He glanced toward Jasmine. Miss Thompson will assist us until certified translators can verify her work tomorrow. His words sounded polite, but everyone heard the resentment beneath them. Even after she had rescued the deal, he still refused to admit she had earned her place. This wasn't respect. It wasn't even acceptance. It was survival. Reed had no choice but to rely on the very person he had humiliated only hours earlier. Jasmine simply nodded. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Then, without a trace of emotion in her voice, she asked, shall we continue with the licensing discussion? Over the next hour, the atmosphere inside the conference room transformed completely. With the language barrier finally gone, conversations that had been stalled for months suddenly moved at remarkable speed. Questions poured in from every delegation. Legal concerns, software architecture, licensing rights, regional compliance, cultural business etiquette. Jasmine moved effortlessly between all 9 languages, translating each discussion with astonishing precision. The Russian delegation has concerns about their new data sovereignty laws, she explained after a rapid exchange in Russian. They require all customer information to remain on domestic servers. Reed answered while carefully watching her, almost waiting for a mistake. Our platform supports regional server isolation. We guarantee full compliance. Jasmine translated his response into flawless Russian. She didn't merely convert the words. She adjusted the formal phrasing to match Russian executive communication, making the response sound both respectful and legally reassuring. The Russian delegation leader nodded immediately, satisfied. Seconds later, she was speaking Japanese, then German, then Portuguese, then Arabic, without notes, without hesitation. When the Chinese delegation questioned the platform's encryption standards, Jasmine translated highly specialized cybersecurity terminology as naturally as everyday conversation. The pace of negotiations accelerated dramatically. Problems that had delayed the agreement for months disappeared within minutes. Even more noticeable, the delegates gradually stopped directing questions to Reed. Instead, they looked at Jasmine. They trusted her explanations more than the translated documents they had received before the meeting. Reed noticed, every second of it, his company was getting closer to closing the biggest deal in its history. Yet the person driving that success wasn't one of his executives. It was the teenager he'd ordered to know her place. A new discussion began when the Saudi delegation introduced recently updated regional privacy regulations. Before Reed could answer, Jasmine quietly added, they're referring to the GCC Unified Data Protection Framework that became effective last month. The Saudi executives immediately exchanged impressed glances. She hadn't simply translated their words. She understood the legal framework behind them. Moments later, the French delegation raised complicated questions involving API integration throughout Europe. Again, Jasmine translated terminology that wasn't even included in Reed's prepared presentation. During a brief pause while documents were exchanged, Reed finally asked the question that had been bothering him. How did you know that? Jasmine looked up. I studied your public developer documentation while preparing for a business interpretation certification. She shrugged slightly. Real technical manuals make better study material than textbooks. For the first time, Reed looked genuinely unsettled. No hidden earpiece, no coaching, no corporate conspiracy, only years of relentless study. His certainty that she couldn't possibly be authentic was beginning to crumble. Nearly 3 hours into the negotiations, everything suddenly stopped. The Japanese and Chinese delegations found themselves locked in a serious disagreement. Neither side was willing to compromise. Mr. Hashimoto spoke first. This is unacceptable. We cannot weaken Japan's user privacy framework. The Chinese delegation leader immediately replied in Mandarin. Our regulations are equally non-negotiable. The room instantly became tense. Reed's executives looked completely lost. What happened? Reed asked sharply. Jasmine translated both positions, then paused, not translating, thinking. She looked down at the technical documents spread across the table, then slowly raised her eyes. Mr. Reed, I don't believe they're actually disagreeing. Every conversation stopped. What do you mean? They're using different terminology for the same technical solution. The room fell silent. She continued calmly. In Japanese business language, the phrase data sovereignty emphasizes user consent. In Mandarin regulatory language, they focus on storage location. She pointed toward the software diagrams. They're asking for the same protection. They're simply describing it differently. Reed stared at her. Explain. Jasmine turned toward both delegations, first in Japanese, then in Mandarin. She carefully explained how Reed Technologies' newest software update allowed regional compliance modules to operate independently while sharing the same architecture, a feature hidden deep inside version 4. 2. Documentation, one that had never been highlighted during the presentation. Reed immediately turned toward his chief technology officer. Is that true? The CTO frantically searched through the product specifications. After several tense seconds, he slowly looked up. Yes. Everyone stared. It's part of version 4. 2. It supports multiple regulatory systems simultaneously. He looked at Jasmine in disbelief. How did you even know that feature existed? Jasmine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up a nearby tablet. Within moments, she had drawn a simple diagram showing exactly how the regional compliance gateways functioned. Then she explained everything again, once in Japanese, once in Mandarin. This time, both delegations immediately understood. They began asking technical follow-up questions. Jasmine translated every answer with remarkable clarity. Finally, the Chinese delegation leader smiled. This satisfies our requirements. Mr. Hishimoto nodded. Ours as well. The deadlock was over. Reed stood perfectly still. A disagreement that had nearly destroyed a multi-billion-dollar partnership had never been a technical problem at all. It had been a language problem, and the only person capable of seeing it was the teenage waitress he'd publicly humiliated earlier that evening. Momentum returned immediately. The Kenyan delegation raised concerns about implementation costs for emerging markets. Without looking at her notes, Jasmine spoke. They're asking whether you'll honor the reduced pricing model you mentioned during last year's International Technology Summit. Reed blinked. He had almost forgotten making that statement. Yes, absolutely. It has always been part of our international strategy. Jasmine translated his answer into flawless Swahili, adding culturally appropriate reassurance that immediately put the delegation at ease. One obstacle after another disappeared. Technical misunderstandings, legal confusion, cultural differences. Every barrier dissolved the moment someone truly understood both languages and the people speaking them. During a brief pause, one Saudi executive quietly leaned toward his colleague. Speaking in Arabic, he whispered, I've worked with professional interpreters for 20 years. I've never seen anyone this accurate. Jasmine heard every word. She simply continued answering questions from the Brazilian delegation as though she hadn't. By the time the final technical concerns had been resolved, Reed called for a short recess. Delegates stood, stretching and chatting excitedly in their native languages. The mood throughout the ballroom had completely changed. People who had nearly walked away were now discussing implementation schedules. Reed slowly approached Jasmine. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the sarcasm. Only curiosity remained. Those regional compliance modules. He paused. They weren't included in our presentation. I know. I found them in your developer documentation. You actually study technical manuals? When you're learning business interpretation, you don't practice with fairy tales. You practice with real companies. Reed gave a small, almost involuntary shake of his head. Our own translation department overlooked that terminology issue. They've missed it for months. The admission clearly hurt his pride. He looked at Jasmine differently now, not as a waitress, not as an inconvenience, as someone whose abilities forced him to reconsider everything he believed. He spoke almost to himself. 9 languages, not conversational, professional. Technical, legal, cultural. Jasmine nodded. Yes. He looked at her carefully. Where did someone your age learn all this? She smiled faintly. I already told you. My mother teaches linguistics. I've studied languages since I was 5. I practice every day. Business reports, legal contracts, technical documentation. That's what real interpreters eventually need. For several seconds, Reed said nothing. Finally, he exhaled. This afternoon, I told you to keep serving drinks. Jasmine met his eyes. That was a mistake. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. Yes, it was. When the negotiations resumed, something subtle had changed. No one waited for Reed anymore. Questions were directed straight toward Jasmine. Mr. Hishimoto approached during document review. Speaking in Japanese, he smiled warmly. Miss Thompson, your command of our language is extraordinary. Where did you receive your training? Jasmine explained her lifelong studies and her dream of becoming an international diplomatic interpreter. He looked genuinely surprised. You're still in school? She laughed softly. Yes. My business Japanese exceeds many professionals I've hired. Similar conversations unfolded throughout the room. The Saudi representatives praised her Arabic. The Russians complimented her handling of complex legal terminology. The Brazilian executives asked whether she'd lived in Sao Paulo because her accent sounded completely natural. Every compliment reached Reed's ears. Every compliment reminded him of the person he had almost thrown out of the ballroom. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Chinese delegation leader reached into his pocket. Your business card? Jasmine smiled apologetically. I'm afraid I don't have one. He looked confused. You don't work for Reed Technologies? No, I'm just working catering tonight. I'm saving money for college. Silence spread around the table. The executives exchanged surprised glances. They had assumed she was a senior international consultant. Instead, she was simply a student, one whose talent had gone completely unnoticed until disaster forced someone to listen. The Kenyan representative turned toward Reed. You must value her greatly. Reed hesitated, long enough for everyone to notice. Actually, she's only helping us tonight. The executive frowned. Only helping? He glanced toward Jasmine. Someone with gifts like hers should be leading international negotiations, not carrying appetizers. Reed had no answer, only silence. As the meeting approached its successful conclusion, Reed's own executives quietly began approaching Jasmine. His marketing director smiled. You just saved this company. The chief technology officer laughed. I barely understand half of those API discussions in English. You explained them in 4 different languages. Even Diane, the event coordinator who had dismissed Jasmine without listening, walked over. I owe you an apology. When you offered to help, I judged you before I heard you. Jasmine smiled kindly. It happens more often than you'd think. Across the ballroom, Sandra stood silently watching everything unfold. Her expression revealed nothing. But Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling. The night still wasn't over. Around the ballroom, the catering staff had quietly stopped working. No one had told them to. They simply couldn't look away. Only a few hours earlier, Jasmine had been the invisible girl carrying trays. Now, she stood at the center of a $9 billion international agreement, speaking confidently with some of the most powerful business leaders in the world. Carlos caught her eye from across the room. He didn't say anything. He simply gave her a discreet thumbs up. Somehow, that silent gesture meant more to Jasmine than every compliment from the executives combined. Reed's legal counsel approached with a thoughtful smile. I have to admit something. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on translation firms. You caught cultural and legal nuances they completely missed. She looked genuinely curious. How did you become this good? Jasmine smiled. Practice. Every single day. For years. The attorney nodded slowly. Most people say they work hard. You actually did. As the final documents were signed and relieved laughter replaced anxious silence, Jasmine felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Peace. For once. No one questioned whether she belonged. No one demanded proof. No one treated her talent as impossible. People simply accepted what she had shown them. after a lifetime of shrinking herself to fit other people's expectations. Being fully seen felt unfamiliar, but it also felt right. The official signing ceremony ended with applause. Representatives from all 9 international delegations gathered beside Reed for photographs. Only hours earlier, the agreement had been moments away from collapsing now. It was complete. A $9 billion partnership had officially been secured. As guests prepared to leave, Mr. Hishimoto walked toward Jasmine carrying a small card holder. Miss Thompson, my company is always searching for exceptional multilingual professionals. When you complete your studies, I hope you'll contact me. He handed her his business card with a respectful bow. One after another, the remaining delegates followed. That a Saudi executive mentioned opportunities within diplomatic advisory programs. The Brazilian delegation discussed future internships. The German investors offered introductions across Europe. Within minutes, Jasmine's hands were full of business cards from companies she'd once only read about in textbooks. Reed watched the entire scene unfold quietly, thoughtfully. Once the ballroom had mostly emptied, he motioned toward a quiet corner. So, he folded his hands. Yale, you really were accepted. Jasmine smiled. I was. Full scholarship? She shook her head. Almost. I'm still trying to close the financial gap. Reed remained silent for several seconds, then spoke. Our company has an education sponsorship program. Full tuition, monthly stipend, paid internships, career placement after graduation. Jasmine stared at him. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity. He answered honestly. Our international relations division needs someone with your abilities. The silence between them felt heavier than either expected. Finally, Jasmine looked directly at him. A few hours ago, you shoved me aside. You told me my place was serving drinks. Reed lowered his eyes. I know. I was wrong. She waited. He continued. Not because you saved the deal. Because I judged you before I knew anything about you. I saw a uniform instead of a person. The honesty surprised even him. Jasmine remained thoughtful. I'll need everything in writing. The scholarship, the role, the expectations. Reed smiled for the first time without arrogance. I wouldn't expect anything less. He extended his hand. Welcome to Reed Technologies. Miss Thompson. This time, when Jasmine accepted his handshake, it wasn't because she needed validation. It was because she'd earned it. 6 months later, morning sunlight poured through the glass walls of Reed Technologies' international headquarters. Inside one of the conference rooms sat Jasmine Thompson. No catering uniform, no serving tray. Instead, a professional nameplate rested neatly before her. Jasmine Thompson, International Relations Liaison at home. Her parents had framed the Yale acceptance letter. Right beside it hung another frame. Her official company identification badge. Thanks to Reed Technologies' educational sponsorship program, every dollar of her tuition was covered. She attended Yale while working remotely during the academic year. Her first major project, completely redesigning the company's international communication system. The results had exceeded every expectation. Global client satisfaction had increased dramatically. Miscommunication costs had dropped. International partnerships had become noticeably stronger. One by one, executives entered the meeting room. Among them was Carlos' cousin, now leading the emerging markets division. The layoffs everyone had feared never happened. Instead, the company expanded. Reed entered last. He acknowledged Jasmine with a respectful nod. It seemed like such a small gesture, yet it meant everything. Months earlier, he hadn't even considered her worthy of conversation. Now, he introduced her at conferences, quoted her ideas during industry panels, and openly credited her for changing the company's international strategy. A young catering employee entered carrying coffee. Jasmine immediately smiled. Thank you, Marcus. She had learned his name on his first day. In fact, she had insisted every catering employee wear visible name tags. Nobody would be invisible simply because of their job title. Not again. Before beginning the meeting, Reed addressed the room. I'd like everyone to recognize Jasmine's work. Our international communication initiative has increased client satisfaction by 43%. Applause filled the room. Jasmine accepted it with quiet confidence. Her mind drifted briefly to the teenager hiding language flashcards between catering shifts. The girl terrified someone might laugh if they saw her practicing. That version of herself was finally gone. After the meeting ended, Reed asked Jasmine to remain. Through the conference room windows, they watched employees crossing the lobby, conversations flowing naturally in languages that the company now fully embraced. Reed smiled thoughtfully. I received an interesting phone call today. Oh, the International Youth Linguistics Association. They want you to deliver the keynote speech at their annual conference. Jasmine blinked. Me? They said your story is inspiring young translators around the world. She laughed softly. That's unexpected. Reed smiled. Is it? The girl who spoke 9 languages saved a $9 billion deal and completely changed how an international company communicates. I'd say you've earned a little attention. She smiled. And you left out the part where you almost threw me out. He laughed. I was hoping you'd eventually forget that. Not likely. Fair enough. His smile slowly faded. A more thoughtful expression replaced it. You know, I've been thinking, how many people like you have I overlooked? How many extraordinary people never get a chance simply because they don't fit someone's expectations? Jasmine gathered her notebook, then answered quietly. Probably far more than we'll ever know. Reed nodded slowly. That's the part that keeps bothering me. She paused beside the door, then turned back one final time. The real question isn't how many talented people we're missing. It's why we've built a world where people have to be extraordinary, just to be noticed. The room fell silent. Reed watched her leave. For once, he had no answer. If this story stayed with you, here's one question to think about. How many incredible people have you walked past without ever realizing what they were capable of? Sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the greatest gift. If this story inspired you, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone whose talents deserve to be recognized. And if you believe every ordinary person has an extraordinary story waiting to be discovered, subscribe to Wild Shadow Tales. We bring you powerful stories of courage, resilience, and unexpected triumph every week. Because sometimes, one person believing in your potential can change everything. And sometimes, the first person who needs to believe in you is you.